Buenos días. Sean todos bienvenidos al Seminario Internacional de Future of Work and Organizational Psychology, Emerging Uses and Trends. This one is the 6th edition of the international seminar organized for the Spanish Journal of Psychology, and as in previous occasion, we get together the best specialists in work and organizational psychology. For it, I want to be grateful for my dear colleague, Professor Vandrés, the chief editor of the Spanish Journal of Psychology, for these so priceless initiatives. And I should also like to thank Luis Barbero, who represents the Colegio Oficial de Psicólogos de Madrid, for his presence and the support of his organization to our journal. The dedicated work in the coordination of my dear colleagues, Professors Alfredo Rodriguez and Mirko Antino, has been fundamental in order that these seminars could have taken place. Professor Baker, Professor Van Dijk, Professor Nicolau, Professor De Witt, Professor Sonnentag, Professor González Romá, and Professor Nielsen, welcome to the Faculty of Psychology of the Universidad Complutense de Madrid. We want to let you know how much we appreciate your generosity of spending your time and sharing your expertise with us. Thank you very much. We hope you find our organization effective, healthy, and nice, because these three concepts are also our three big concerns. And if it's not like that, let me know. Considering that we spend a big part of our lives working, the topic of this international seminar is relevant for all of us, no matter which is our field of expertise. So I'm sure that we are going to learn a lot and to enjoy as well. So vamos a dar comienzo a esta sesión y voy a ceder la palabra a mi compañero, el profesor Javier Vandrés.
Well, I just want to give you our warmest welcome to Madrid and to the School of Psychology of this university. I'm sure that the excellent work that the organizers have done will give us a lot of important rewards in this seminar. We are trying to attract to this school to some of the best scholars in international psychology, and I am sure that this time we have done so. So thank you for coming and welcome to our school.
Thank you, Javier. As you know, I changed the order of the presentation. Sorry, Luis. It's your turn.
No problem. Thank you very much. And buenos días, good morning, welcome, and thanks all of you for your assistance. My English is not very good, but well, I will say to be understood. First of all, for me it's a pleasure to be here in the representation of the College of Psychologists, okay, of Madrid. It's a pleasure as well to be here with Javier Vandrés, with you, and Javier Vandrés, that is the director of the Spanish Journal of Psychology, which is co-edited by the College of Psychologists of Madrid and the School of Psychology in which we are developing this ad. About the ad, this seminar comes at a time of important activity of work psychology in our country. 2 years ago, few examples. 2 years ago, the College of Psychologists of Madrid organized the first International Congress of Both Psychology and Human Resources, convened by the General Psychology Council of Spain. In the scientific and organization committees of the Congress participated distinguished and significant members of the Complutense University. Personally, and on behalf of the college, thank you very much. Last year, it's been a publication as well of the College of Psychology of Galicia, dedicated absolutely, completely to the human resources. Last year as well, at the end of November, the College of Psychology from Madrid organized 3 days of conferences and workshops about the challenges and different applications of the word psychology. Just 2 months ago, the second Congress of Work Psychology and Human Resources was held this time in Valencia, and it was organized by the College of Psychology of Valencia, again convened by the General Psychology Council of Spain. As you can see, conferences, courses, seminars, workshops, publications in professional and general media, and different activities about work psychology and human resources are flourishing across Spain with the contribution of psychology association, public and private organizations, or individual psychologists. It seems that we are trending, yes, and I think that we should be proud of that. And today we can see the start of the international seminar, The Future of Work and Organizational Psychology, Emerging Issues and Trends, organized by the School of Psychology with the collaboration as well as the College of Psychologists of Madrid, which I am proud to represent. I want to remark in this context the importance of this seminar. I am sure it will help us to understand and better manage the challenges of the profession in the future. A future that we don't know yet, but in which we are going, without any doubt, to influence. I believe, absolutely, in the necessity of a close connection between university, between research, and professional application of the word psychology. And be sure that the models, research works, discussions and conclusions of the seminar will be of enormous utility to the practical application of our profession in companies and organizations. Companies and organizations, I know that well, that they need us. Because we know about the element, the most important in the organization, people. And because of that, we are in the best position to face an amazing future that surely we are helping to build since now. We hope that these sessions will be useful for the development of our profession and specialty. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Luis, for your words. The cooperation between the university's faculty with the professional college is very close and very fruitful. Thank you, Luis, for your words. So, Alfredo, it's your turn.
Well, thank you, Nieves. First of all, it's my great pleasure to welcome all of you to this international seminar about work and organizational psychology. We are very grateful, first of all, to the Spanish Journal, to the Faculty of Psychology, and obviously to the Colegio Oficial de Psicólogos for supporting and hosting and funding, which is the most important, the money, this event. I would like also to thank to our speakers, and also, sorry, I forgot, in their faculty, especially to Ana Montero and Ana Barron, who has been behind all in organizing everything, and without their help it would be impossible. Also, this would be impossible with our speakers. We are here to listen all of them, so we have to thank them also, because I know they have a really busy schedules and they saved the day for being with us today. We have speakers from 6 different European countries, and I can assure you that they are the best in our field. So we are lucky for have you here. Thank you very much for coming. I also have to mention the previous seminars that has been organized here in the faculty. They have a tremendous level. I attended some of them as a student and participant. I remember those about intelligence, assessment of teaching, cognition, positive emotion. So we hope to be at least at the same level that the previous seminars, which is quite complicated probably. And I think that we have to I have to say that we are lucky for having this initiative here in the faculty. It's an opportunity to stop our daily routine, to think about one specific topic, and to discuss about the state of the art of our field. So we are going to have 2 days of debate and discussion, and I think we are lucky because of that. Looking around, I see many familiar faces, students and colleagues. It's great to see you all here. I really appreciate that you came to being with us. And we hope that you enjoy this event as much as we have enjoyed organizing it. And I hope that you can have 2 interesting days of debate and networking. So thank you for coming. Thank you.
Thank you. I think it's not matter to spend more time in gratitude and say hello and so on, because the journey is very intense and there is a lot of things to have to be said. So I declaro inaugurado este seminario internacional. Espero que todos ustedes disfruten mucho durante el día de hoy y también la jornada de mañana. Así que nada, buenos días y comiencen a trabajar.
Let's begin. Okay. No, I think so. Well, let's begin if we can. First of all, one practical information about the questions that we are going to have during the seminar. We have 40 minutes for each speaker, 45 minutes, and I hope that you can have questions, and you can send questions in 2 different ways. Through this application, Slido, where you only have to enter the code. You don't need to register or anything, and it's going to help you to participate and to send comments, questions, and whatever you want to say. You can vote for the questions that you like most, and then I can transmit the questions to the speakers. Also, we will be open to have a traditional way of asking, which is with a microphone and all live, so you can do this as well. The hashtag that I will encourage you to use as well during the Twitter and all the activity that you have in the social network is WOP Seminar UCM. You can see there the hashtag. Yes? More clear? No? Well, then you just have to enter the code and you are on the application. Okay? And let's see if it's working, that microphone, because I don't really like to be sit while the presentation. Yes, thank you. It's working now. So, my turn is to give a general overview about what is going to happen, although this is too much, but about what is going to happen in our field in the next years, okay? My intention with this intervention is what we have done together, Mirko and I, we have been working on this, to give a general overview and a framework for the seminar to transmit, which is the initial idea of the seminar and why we organize this seminar, okay? So, in this sense, the initial question about this was if you're ready for the 4th Industrial Revolution. If you haven't heard about what is 4th Industrial Revolution, probably you have the answer. You are not ready. So it's good that you are in the seminar to get some information about it, okay? But we are living in a time of turbulent dynamics and a lot of changes, and these changes are going to transform the way we work and how the organization are designed. So this is the main idea, to discuss with you and to have I guess, an active debate, okay? So for this, we have a great lineup of speakers, as I mentioned, from different European countries. For understanding the impact, I'm going to give you only 2 numbers, okay? I'm a number guy, and I like to quantify everything. So the first number is 400. 400, well, to be more precise, is 405. Is the H index of all the speakers together, all of the publications that they have. So this is one of the numbers. The second number, for understanding the impact of the research of our speakers, is 150,000, which is the number of citations that the papers of our speakers receive. So as you can imagine, if you are used to this kind of metrics, you can understand that we have a really great lineup of speakers and keynote speakers today. Well, we have to bear in mind one thing. Quoting to the Nobel Prize Niels Bohr, I have to tell you that prediction is quite difficult, especially if this is about future. So my intention is not to give or make any prediction, but rather to discuss about potential scenarios that we are going to have in our field. It doesn't matter if you are not going to work in the work and organizational psychology field, you are going to suffer this change. So at least you have to be aware what is going to happen in the world of work, okay? So taking a look back at the early predictions for understanding how risky business is to making predictions, in the 70s it was suggested that the human intelligence would be replaced by machines in the organizations, and that in some years all the office will be paperless. So these predictions were not true, so you can understand how risky it is to make predictions. More recent examples, probably you know these examples. Brexit and Trump victory. Nobody expected that Trump won, so I'm not going to make the same mistake, okay? But yes, I like to discuss some of the potential scenarios about this. Well, it has been suggested that there are 3 main drivers of change nowadays in our environment. The first one is technology and innovation, which is probably the main disruptor of how the organizations are designed nowadays. And in this domain are especially important things like automation of jobs, big data and analytics, and as well artificial intelligence. Another important driver of change is the business and the change of in the economy. New models of business are appearing, and this has a huge implications in terms of contract and identity of the workers in the organization. I will try to explain this idea. And also we are facing important changes in the society that will have also a tremendous impact on the organization and the way we work. So with the first one, technology and innovation, in this sense there is an important, at least 8 important technologies. Probably you're familiar with them. It seems that these are technologies that in 2 years, not so far away, in 2 years will change everything. Robots, drones, 3D printing, augmented and virtual reality, artificial intelligence, Internet of Things. These are things that together with other technological developments will have a huge impact on how we work, okay? Just in this sense, I will give you 2 statistics. The first one is based on one famous study of Free and Osborne, and is 5 out of 10 jobs are going to disappear in the next 25 years. I don't want to be dramatic, okay? Because it's supposed that new jobs will appear, but there's going to be a huge change. The other one is that 6 out of 10 children that nowadays, today, they are in the primary school, they will end up working in completely different jobs that now we don't know how they are. They don't exist. So it seems that we are in the middle of a huge change in this sense. So one question that we have in our domain, I don't know if this is working, yes? Okay. One question that we have now in our domain is whether the robots are going to take your job. It seems to be like a question of a movie, but a lot of experts are working on this idea, okay? So I have to admit that we always have some kind of fear and anxiety with technology. When technology is appearing in our work environment, there is a traditional response to be afraid of what is going to happen. For this, you can see 3 different covers. The first one is of the 60s, 70s, and 2 years ago about what is going to happen with technology at work. As you can see, it's the same idea. The robots are going to take out your job. But to be honest, if we take a look into the history, what happened, technology, at least until now, it's always from the initial disruption creating new jobs. So it seems that it's not going to be a huge problem, but you can check it if you are interested. There is a web page where you can check whether your job is going to disappear. And I have good news. I check our profile and it seems that we are safe. We have a low probability of being automatized in the work environment. So occupational and work and organizational psychologists, they are not going to be replaced by machines, okay? But things are going to change probably. Other jobs are going to disappear completely, according to several statistics. Cashiers, farmers, drivers, postal workers are going to disappear. So if you're thinking about, I don't know, investing money in one of these sectors, I will encourage you to change your mind about it. And there is something really surprisingly for me, that some traditional sectors that seems to be safe, they are at risk nowadays because of the advance of technology. And these are teachers, doctors, lawyers, where technology will have such important development that maybe their jobs are going to disappear or change dramatically. So if you want to decrease your anxiety, check your sector, and maybe you have to change your sector and check your job activity, okay? So the other thing important is whether we are going to have enough new jobs after the destructions of these jobs to replace the current activity. I have to tell you that there is a lot of fluctuation in this data, but in general, the main idea is that no, we are not going to have enough jobs. So it seems that in some sectors, we are going to be in a jobless scenario. So in this case, I think that I'm being a little bit dramatic, but it's true. So if you want to have a perfect profile, go to the data. Data is the new goal. Nowadays, we are seeing what has been called datafication of our daily activity. And the main idea of several engineers and experts in mathematics is that our judgment is not really fashionable at all, because it's full of biases. We, as a psychologist, we are aware of these biases. So they are trying to develop ways of measuring like personality and human behavior in a different way, okay? So for this, they have big data. Probably you heard about it. Is the analysis of a huge amount of information with different techniques that they are developing. And people analytics in the organization, this is like the new word. You have to be in the domain of people analytics, but to be honest, sometimes we have some experiences about this, that people analytics in one company, they told us, no, we are working with artificial intelligence, and this questionnaire for assessing the satisfaction of the employees is based on artificial intelligence. Oh, wow, this is quite interesting. Can you tell me more about it? Behind this, it was an Excel file crossing data. So there is a lot of marketing in this. But the main idea is to have an effective data management for getting new insights in the organization. How to manage properly to the employees, how to get increments on performance. There's a lot of possibilities in this sense, okay? So I'm going to give you some examples about how technology is nowadays in the organization. I don't know if you know what is a chatbot. A chatbot is a technology that is simulating a conversation. It's a machine, a program with an algorithm that is simulating a conversation with a human being. That's all. And the possibilities are huge. The first one is about selecting. Some companies are making the initial screening with this chatbot. No human behind, only a chatbot getting information with a profile, and that's all. They are selecting the initial amount of people for the interview. So it's also something that is going to change is the annual self-assessment or reviews in the organization. A lot of people they are trying to avoid this kind of traditional ways of assessing, and they are using chatbots as well because they are able to give employees instant feedback, and in that way to have a more proximal feedback to the event. So this is another possibility. And another possibility for those who are more into clinical psychology, probably you are thinking about, well, my sector is safe, because what about having a human interaction? No, sorry, because now the chatbots are also in clinical psychology. They are developing, for instance, the way of assessing psychological disorders, but also they are developing treatment with chatbots. So I think in that sector is going to be also an important revolution. I want to share with you this study. I think it's quite interesting. Probably you know it's a study of 2 years, I think a couple of years ago. Yes. And they try to assess personality based on Facebook likes. The initial idea is interesting, but what is really scaring are the results. With some Facebook like, they can assess personality much better, a machine I mean, with an algorithm, much better than your coworker, your friend, your family, and quite similar that your spouse. So, and according to these authors, I have the data here. If you give them 10 likes, they will make a profile better than your work colleague. With 70, better than your friend. With 150, will know more about you than your family. And with more than 300, will have a better approach to your personality than your wife or husband. So, for me, it's scary, to be honest. But it seems that they are developing new ways of assessing behavior, which will mean a huge revolution for us. Another example is, for instance, Amazon. Probably you know that Amazon is opening, it's already open, the Amazon Go shop, where you don't have to have any interaction with a human. You go there, pick up whatever you want, and just leave. Because through different methods, like for instance visual recognition, they are going to make the charge in your bank account of that product. So, and in the companies, there's one example there, and it's not the only one. In UK, they are putting chips into the employees for tracking different variables. So this is opening a huge possibilities. Like as an occupational health psychologist, I would like to have access to the information of a whole day of an employee of different things. But it's also bringing a lot of criticisms in this area. Okay, the first one is that this kind of assessment is not free of biases. One controversy that you probably remember was the program of Google that labeled as gorillas to black people. Is a facial recognition algorithm that decided that gorillas were as black people. So in somehow they are having the same biases because they are programmed by humans. So we are transferring to this way of assessment our stereotypes and biases. And also an important thing is that they are not using theory at all. Probably now the students are looking at me like telling, theory again? Is theory in all the places? Yes, we need theory for understanding, for instance, whether one correlation is significant or is just an spurious correlation, okay? So this is something that is happening, especially with such a big amount of data. Is quite likely to find correlations that are not significant really or meaningful, but they are significant. So this is an important thing that we as a psychologist have to do. We have rigor, we have a lot of training in methods, and we will have to be in that sector. In fact, a lot of people is telling, well, there's a lot of engineers, a lot of experts in mathematics, but no psychologists in big data analysis. So this is an important thing. My first take-home message is this. It's quite clear that technology is has already changed our profile and will continue to do so. So we have to be ready for getting more knowledge in technology, in analytical data, and for improving our profile. The other thing is how business is changing or the economy is changing the way we relate with the organization as employees. Probably you know what is called the gig economy. If you don't know, you are using this kind of economy. Uber, Deliveroo, Cabify, Airbnb. These companies are using this way of relating with employees, which is, let's say, controversial. The main idea with this is that we are just forgetting the traditional way of making a contract to an employee and have this employee on the organization, and now everything is disrupting this traditional profile. Now is everything done online through platforms. You are going to be paid through the platform for the specific thing that you are doing. This has a lot of implications. For instance, if you are a worker for Deliveroo, with your bike delivering the food, what are you? An user of the of this platform or a worker of the company? If you're a Uber driver, what are you? Who is behind you? If you have an accident, who is covering this? So this traditional way of thinking about how an employee is related to the organization is disappearing. According to several statistics, this is increasing, and the way of having this kind of relations with employees will increase, at least in the US, and probably you know that is going to happen in Europe too. So, as occupational health psychologist, I have a lot of doubts about this new way of arrangement between employee and employer. Why? Because there are a lot of characteristics that are not leading to well-being, but the contrary, they are leading to illness and mental problems. For instance, they have low insecurity and low payment. They have bad job conditions. This is they have been defined as creative class. Now they are precariat. So another important thing is that this technology is blurring the lines between work and home, which has also important implication. And probably, which is also even more important, is the isolation of the employees. You are working alone at home, trying to deliver a product, maybe, I don't know, a presentation, whatever it is, and you need to have human interaction. We don't have to forget that we are human and we are social animals in that sense. So they are trying to avoid this with what is called co-working spaces, which is a new trend here in Madrid. We have like I don't know, Media Lab, a lot of places where you can go and have a desk and you have, well, colleagues. They are in the same situation. So in that way, they are trying to avoid this. But giving you the whole profile, the whole picture is isolation, job insecurity, low payment, potential work-family conflict. What is this? It's a bomb that is going to explode. At least from the point of view of the health of the employees, is really negative. Maybe for the company it's going to be great in terms of financial saving maybe, but in terms of the employees, complicated. So the second message is that these alternative work environments appears to be here to stay, because they are increasing both in US and Europe. So it seems that these are going to be the new ways of hiring people. And the final factor that is changing, according to our view, society, we can discuss whether we missed something, probably we did it. We have to summarize for this lecture, is how the society is changing and how this change is having an impact on the employee. The first thing is the aging of the population. I don't know if you know, I'm always telling this data, this statistic to my student. Spain is going to be in 2050 the second oldest country in the world. In the world, I mean. After Japan, we are going to be the second. At least we are on the top of a list. This is great. But this is not so positive, to be honest. Why? It has several implications like pensions or social systems or well-being of the citizens, but also in the work environment it will have an important implication too. We need to be able to manage age diversity. This is the first time that 4 generations are working at the same time in the work environment. And now, when traditional, what they has been called traditional, are retiring, the generations that are coming with new values, new interests, new ways of working. And an important skill will be to be able to manage this diversity in the work environment. Because we know, and there's a lot of information about this, that age is related to several work outcomes. For instance, they perform much better, older employees, when they have increased autonomy and decreased task variety. So an important skill as well for us as organizational psychologists will be to manage this diversity when we are doing, for instance, job design, when we are trying to reduce stereotypes of young people respecting the old people and the other way around. So this is another trend which is quite clear. This is not just a prediction. This is something that is going to happen because it's a fact of numbers. We are getting old and we are not having kids, so this is an important issue. Another important issue is work and life. There is an increased interest in the societies to have a better work-family balance, and in this sense, this will be an important benefit to offer to the employees in the traditional way of conceiving the employees. And one important trend as well is going to be those experts in relating the work and non-work domain, because we know that what is happening at home is having an impact in the work environment, and what is happening in the work environment is going to have an impact in your family and at home. For instance, I couldn't sleep very well today, and my performance probably is going to decrease because, and the fault is of my kids, so you can blame them if I'm making mistakes. No, it's just a joke. So the way that we work is changing. This is the general idea. It's going to be a scenario based on short-term contracts, on-demand, flexible, multiple skill-based, data-driven, and replaced in some cases, not all the cases, by machines. So in this, I would say, positive scenario, we have to do some things. For instance, we have to change the way we do research in some domains. There are some domains arising and coming up, and like, for instance, new way of selection. As we have an expert in the room and he's going to give a lecture about this, Professor Nicolau will talk about how new technology is helping us to select in a better way to new people at work. Another important thing is the new gig economy. If we are going to have several jobs due to this new way of arrangement, we need to change the way of thinking about socialization processes in the organization. no traditional way of thinking anymore. We need to go for instance, multiple identities at work. Which is your organization? Now I have clear that my organization is Complutense. But if I'm working in several places, which is the dominant identity for me? This is going to have an impact on my well-being, so it's important to know this. It's going to be interesting. I don't have an answer for this, but it's going to be interesting how to increase motivation and engagement of employees in these non-traditional scenarios. I have no idea, to be honest, but let's see if applying the traditional techniques, we are going to get the same results. That's why we have experts here. So I'm going to transfer the question, if you have, to our experts in the room. And in this new context, obviously, we need to have a multi-level approach because we have different levels, different contexts and domains, and we need to have a multi-level approach when assessing and when we are making interventions in these organizations. This slide is for the students. If you want to be competitive, you need to increase your competencies in these skills. Data analytical data. You need to have knowledge about how to treat data, how to analyze them, and how to transform these data into insights for the companies. This is quite important. As well, complex problem solving. You need sometimes to give an answer for a problem that is not even defined. So it's going to be complicated in the new work environment. You need to know, although I think in that way you are more competent than we are, to be persuasive in the new wave of communication like YouTube and these social network platforms, because this is going to be an important tool and skill for the organizations. And something that you hate, you need to coordinate with others. Teamwork is going to be even more important, especially virtual teamwork. Then sometimes you want to avoid some of your colleagues. Now you are going to be able. You are not going to be working in the same room, but you need to be working in online. So this competence is also to be quite important. And in this sense, we, the universities, we have a huge responsibility to try to offer. Sometimes we are not able because the changes are so fast that we are not able to adapt our profile to these new skills that you are going to need in the work environment. So the main idea of the seminar is this: try to think about one issue and be more prepared for the future that is coming. So I hope that these 2 days is going to be useful for you, and you can get new ideas, new insights about what to do with your profile and how to manage people in the new environment. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoy my presentation. Okay. I'm going to check whether we have questions here, or you want to make questions with a microphone. Technology. Okay, what are your thoughts on universal basic income and its potential effects on well-being and performance? This is a quite complicated question, to be honest. It seems, according to several experts, that we are going to have a jobless future, and a lot of people will not be able to have a work and a job and to have an income. And in somehow, states will need to develop or to have strategies for avoiding this situation. Are we going to be able to do it? I don't think so, because this has to be done by politicians. So I don't really trust so much in them, but according to several statistics, it seems that we are going to need to have, and this is really negative, new ways of treating pensions, for instance, because of the aging of population. But I'm not really an expert on this, but I'm not really optimistic, to be honest. Another question is, what about your feelings and emotions when we use the chatbot for recruiting, assessment, or intervention? My feeling is that this is done mainly by engineers and experts in mathematics, and they don't have any idea about human behavior. They have a different mind. It's okay. We need this kind of people, but we need to get involved into this new way of selection, because otherwise, sometimes they are going to make a decision based only in an algorithm, and it seems that the machines are perfect. Like, they don't have biases. They are perfect. They are so sophisticated. But behind that algorithm is a guy programming, and with biases, with stereotypes, and changing the algorithm will change everything. So we need to have the human behind. Probably, I think it's good for the screening phase of the selection, but not so much for the later phases of selection, because we need to have more information about this. What are your, which team is better? No, sorry, it's a joke. Some people are sending comments. Do you have any questions on the room? Because we also have a microphone. If you feel more comfortable just standing up and making a question, or just sitting as you want. Yes? It's not here. Maybe I have to refresh, but...
Oh, thank you. Thank you for your talk. Really interesting. So, which changes need our university to cope with these challenges? Which is your feeling or your guess? And the second one is, perhaps do we need to recover the term engineer psychologist? That was the first one for a work psychologist in the 19th.
Yes.
Thank you.
Well, with the second one, sometimes in period of crisis, some people is telling that you have to go back to the roots, to the basic. And maybe we have to come back to have more numbers and more engineer thinking in our profile. How to do it? Our profiles are quite stable and are changing now and then, every, I don't know, 10 years, maybe, I don't know. But I will incorporate this kind of seminar or workshops specialized in specific skills that students are going to need. I know that it's quite complicated due to bureaucratic processes, but in somehow we need to offer them these kind of skills. And I'm not a person who think that university needs to be a place where you need to develop employees. No. I think university is something broader. We need to build good citizens, and in this profile we need to offer skills that are going to be needed, but in somehow we need to find a way. And I think workshops, specialized workshop, or maybe the masters that they have more flexibility, or maybe the person in charge will be open to have more flexible masters in collaboration with the companies. And I know that formula is not really welcome in the university, but in somehow, some of the masters need to be like that. But yes, it's a good point, Angeles, to have coming back to the roots and maybe be a little bit more engineer. Yes. More questions?
Hi, good morning. Thank you for your presentation. You tell us a lot about how the context is shaping, and it's shaping everything, and we need to respond to that. What about the other way around? What is the role of individuals to shape those changes? I mean, what can we do in order to shape those changes to our favor? What is our role? So some thoughts about that would be more than appreciated. Thanks.
That's a good point. Thanks for the question. I think that the context is more powerful always than individuals, but in somehow individuals can change the work environment. One important trend nowadays is individual job crafting, which is an individual way of job redesign. But in that way, I think that we are discussing about changes in society, and individual in an organization will have less control or less power to change, but job crafting will be a possibility to craft your task according to your needs and demands, and being able to, in somehow, change it a little bit for having more autonomy and for having better well-being. That would be one possibility. You have said that the new skills, like analytical skills, new media, how could we get them? How we could get them? Well, you can get them here in the university, because we are not so used to move from one faculty to other, but this libre elección créditos is something for that, like going to, I don't know, the Faculty of Periodismo, and you can have a course about new media communication, or going to Faculty of Economics to have another course. You need to open your profile, and you need to distinguish your profile from other profiles. An easy way is to have a course in what is the most important trend nowadays, is new data, big data, sorry. But you have to be open to move to other faculties and to have a different profile. A more mixed profile will be much better for you, because your future will be more in collaboration with people from different disciplines. So I will encourage you to do something like that. How these changes are going to affect to the workers that have instability at work? Well, I'm going to pass that question for the next sessions to Hans de Witte, who is an expert on job insecurity. But the main idea is to increase your employability. The idea that you have a profile that is competitive and that you can compete in this world, in this new world. So how to increase your employability? Then let's leave something for the next session. So I think we are running out of time. If you have any question, maybe the last one. No more questions? Okay. Then I think now it's time to introduce our first speaker, who is Professor Arnold Backe. It's my pleasure to welcome Arnold to the Faculty of Psychology at Complutense. Arnold is professor. I have to read some of the things because they have a lot of merit, so let's try to summarize them. He's professor of work and organizational psychology and director of the Center of Excellence for Positive Organizational Psychology at Erasmus University of Rotterdam in the Netherlands. He's also in touch as visiting professor in several universities, South Africa, Hong Kong, not anymore maybe, yes, South Africa, Hong Kong. He's the past president of the EWOP Society, and he is also one of the most famous researchers in our field, because he developed, among others, the job demand resources model, probably you know this one, the engagement research. He's one of the main authors in this research. And some interesting things, Arnold has been included in one prestigious list, which is called the World Most Influential Scientific Minds. He was in the list. And he published, I checked this the other day, he published almost 500 papers, and is one of the most cited authors in our field. So we are lucky to have him, although he's Barca supported, but no one is perfect. And share with us a presentation about Work Home Resources Model. So please join me in welcoming our Professor Backe. I will let you know now. Something happened. Do you have water?
Good morning, buenos días. Thank you, Alfredo and Mirko, for inviting me in this beautiful city. I was the one posing a question about the best team, Real versus Barça, because my presentation will be about how your family or home experiences may influence your work life. And we actually did a study on how the football result of your football team in the weekend, like Barça winning the Copa here in Madrid this weekend, how that influences your work engagement on Monday. And there is a positive effect, so I'm very engaged today, as you can imagine, because they trashed Sevilla. But okay, that's enough about my personal experiences, but it is a study, if you're interested in it, it has been published in the Journal of Occupational and Organizational Psychology, and I'm very happy about it, and it's about all football teams, even Real. I'm going to talk today about the work-home resources model, and I'm happy to have seen Alfredo's interesting presentation. He more or less set the stage for boundaries between work and home disappearing through the idea of new ways of working, through the idea of the gig economy, who are you working for, do you work from home, and so forth. This makes the question of how does work interact with your private life even more important. And that is where my presentation will be about. I have several studies that I want to present, but I start with theory, and this is important as Alfredo noticed. And the idea is that the model that we propose, it would be more helpful than existing approaches in the work-family domain. So if you look at the work-family domain, and if you're a little bit familiar with the approach, then what's happening is that we are often looking at how demands in one domain, for example, in your work domain, for example, a high work pressure, may interfere with your family role. Yeah, so there's a kind of role conflict. And the point is, of course, that employees have limited resources, so if you use up all your time for work, then you cannot spend them on reading a book for your children, for example. This is an important perspective that is, of course, in the literature since 30 years or so, and it's very useful, but this approach ignores that work can also have a positive effect on your private life, or the other way around. What happens at home or with your football team can also have a positive impact on how you experience your work and how you do your work. However, the process that is going on in the existing approaches is relatively unclear, and I can explain it to you using this example item. So if you read with me, work-family conflict, for example, is often measured by items like I'm often so emotionally drained when I get home from work that it prevents me from contributing to my family. So in the item, the cause and the consequence is already given. So I'm emotionally drained, that's the stressor or the situation, and that makes me contribute less to my family. Yeah, so employees are asked to make an estimation of the causal process that is going on. And this is difficult, I think. And I think this is why we need an alternative, because people cannot really estimate very well how something has an effect and how big this effect is. This is a very difficult, complex phenomenon to assess. The other approach that is prevalent in the literature is the work-family enrichment approach, where the idea is that if you gain resources in one domain, for example, you feel good because you have a nice family, you are supported by the people at home, then you may profit from that in the other domain, at work, for example. So, for example, if you build up skills at work, you learn a lot of things, you have support from nice colleagues, you use humor, like in this presentation with Alfredo, I tried to make a joke. That will make me feel good, and I can tell at home what I went through, because people at home know Alfredo. So, there are several ways in which work can influence family life, also in a positive way, but this approach generally ignores negative spillover and also doesn't look at, for example, the cultural system in which things are happening or the role of personality, for example. Is work to family enrichment or conflict, does it work the same for all people? Here's an example of how work to family enrichment is assessed. My involvement in my work provides me with a sense of accomplishment. I get things done. And this helps me to be a better family member. So for example, because I come home with a good mood and I'm ready to help with washing the dishes or preparing the dinner. Yeah, that's the idea behind this existing approach. And I find it a little bit a complex approach because the effect is in the items and this is not good in terms of methodology. And therefore we need a new approach. The gaps that we identify in the literature is what is actually the causal process behind work-family conflict and enrichment. Is work-family conflict or enrichment more likely under certain conditions, macro conditions, or among employees with certain personality traits? And the question is, how do these things develop over time? This is also often not clear. So for example, you see a lot of research showing that work pressure is a predictor of higher scores on these items. So what does it tell me? So I have a high work pressure. That makes me apparently emotionally drained and prevents me from contributing to my family. It's a bit complex, as you may notice. Okay, so we propose another way to go about the work-home resources model. And one of the ideas is that we have to distinguish between causes and consequences and what happens in between. The model is supposed to give more insights in what is happening at work and at home. And if we have better insight, then we can maybe better manage it. So this is the idea of building this model. And we have a process approach. So we try to find out what is happening on a daily basis. So what is happening in one domain, how does that influence the other domain? So, and it can look like this. Relatively simple. Something happens at work, a work demand. For example, you have to deal with a complicated customer or client with the demand in question. That eats up a lot of your attention and time. So for example, you have to work till 6 o'clock to help this complicated customer. That means that you arrive very late at home, which means that you cannot help prepare dinner. So you're functioning in the work domain, in this model, is said to influence home outcomes through eating up your personal resources. And personal resources are volatile, fluctuating things that could be things like time, your energy level, could be your mood, your feelings of self-esteem in the moment, and so forth, your happiness, and so forth. So this is from work to home, but it can also go from home to work. Yeah, so home demands, for example, what Alfredo was telling about not sleeping very well and having to deal with the situation with where children need to go to school. So something has to be organized so that everything goes smoothly, even though Alfredo had to go early to the hotel to pick us up. That was eating up a lot of his time and energy, and that then influences work outcomes. Yeah? This is a bit more complicated graph. Can you read it in the back? I'm not going to go through everything. Alfredo, is this a pointer?
Yeah, you have one?
Or do I put it down?
Get it pressed like this.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Cool. Okay, I want to go here first. But you need to look at the whole model to understand what I'm going to. So the idea here is that It's a model about resources, so we need to talk about the definition of resources and to categorize resources. We say that resources can be contextual, can be in the environment. So I'm reading now the horizontal top category, the source. Can be contextual or can be more personal. So that's important. It's in your environment or in yourself. And further, it can be more structural or more volatile. So this is more stable, and here's changing. Yeah, so in that way we get 4 general categories of resources, and the personal resources I was referring to in the 4 models that I showed, they are here. Your mood, your physical energy, your cognitions, your attention, the time that you have, and so forth. Energies. There's a typo there, but it's energies. Okay, if you look over a longer period of time, personal resources could also mean that over time you get certain skills, like getting used to this device, how to use it, so that the next time you don't have to interact with the organizer about it. Knowledge, experience, that will all help you to get your work done, to get things done. So these are then more stable resources that you could have. Let me think. Yeah, well, another important category, and I will talk about the resources later on, so you don't have to memorize everything at the moment. But one important category is key resources. I will define them in a minute, but these are things like your general optimism, your personality in terms of your emotional stability, for example. If you're emotionally stable or if you are an extrovert, this can help you to get or to use the resources in your environment. So this is an important key resource. That's why we put them on the site, and they are more structural, more stable, and we will see how we model that later on. Okay, I showed models beginning with demands, but there are also resources, of course, in the work and the home domain. And the idea being here, for example, work resources like feedback or the opportunity to use a lot of skills in your work can give you a feeling of accomplishment or can make you enthusiastic about your work, and that will, you will bring that home and you will talk enthusiastically or be in a positive mood, and that will help you to do more things proactively at home with your family. You have the energy to engage in your hobbies and so forth. So this is the idea. And it goes from work to home, and of course from home to work. There's always the 2 sides of the whole process. If we put everything together, this is a relatively simple model, but there's a lot of ideas behind it. Then we see that the context, and the context is on the left side, contextual demands and resources influence personal resources, like your energy, your mood, and so forth, and this influences outcomes in the other domain. Yeah, so for example, a conflict with your partner at home, in the home domain, influences your mood, and maybe you are irritated or stressed, so that influences the personal resources you have available when you enter the workplace. So you are approaching now this demanding customer, but you had this experience of conflict at home, and you will have less empathy, most likely, with this customer. Or put differently, from work to home, when you have success in the work domain, for example, you have a paper accepted as an academic, or you make promotion, that will give you a boost in your self-esteem, or you will feel good about this, and this may make you the perfect chef, and you will make a perfect dinner suddenly. Because you have a lot of energy, you feel good, and so forth. Key resources like optimism are supposed to strengthen the effect of resources, of contextual resources. So let me try again. So we have here the key resources. They strengthen this effect. So contextual resources influencing personal resources is strengthened by your stable personality, your optimism, and so forth. Or key resources can be used to deal with the demands that you are facing in whatever domain. And we have macro resources. I will not talk a lot about it, but I have a definition here. These are characteristics of the larger economic, social, and cultural system in which a person is embedded. So, for example, we had a conversation in the car this morning about the situation in Spain, that we saw some kids going to school at 9 o'clock, and we said, oh, do they start late? Well, they start a little bit late, but it's quite comparable to the Netherlands. Actually, it's only half an hour later. But we know that many Spanish employees work till 8 o'clock and have long siestas. And this is a problem for interference with the family. Yeah, so the macro system of the Spanish culture is partly determining whether we can deal well with the contextual demands, or whether we can mobilize the contextual resources. Yeah, that is how you can interpret macro resources. Key resources are formally defined as stable management resources that facilitate the selection, alteration, and implementation of other resources. So if you are conscientious, extrovert, optimistic, and so forth, this will help you to get your daily contextual resources into place. So the one question was about what is the role of the employees? Well, your role is to influence the environment, perhaps, to be proactive, and you will be more likely to be proactive if you have a stable personality, for example. And this is a key resource that helps you to mobilize contextual resources, for example. Okay. Let's go to the first study. Several of the studies have been conducted in China. We have also Dutch studies. There are also some examples in the literature carried out in, for example, Singapore. But I'm presenting a lot of new stuff that we've done. And most of the work is in collaboration with Danyang Du. She's a Chinese PhD student that has been with us for 4 years. We'll go back after the summer to work in Shanghai. And Daantje Derks, who is one of my colleagues, one of my co-workers. And with this team, we work on this work-home resource model. And the first study is about Chinese working parents. And we follow them over 5 working days, and we ask them questions 3 times a day. And we do that around noon, between 11 and 1 o'clock. And they look back on what happened in the morning. Then at the afternoon, around 5, 6, 7 o'clock, we ask them, how was your afternoon? And we ask them in the night, before they go to bed, what happened during the evening and also during the whole day. And one of the things we focus on in this particular diary study, quantitative diary study, is family hassles. So things happening in the home domain. And we selected Chinese working parents by going to the nursery homes, to the kindergarten, so to ensure that they all had at least 1 kid. Most of them have only 1 kid, by the way. So that there would be a lot of possible hassles. Hassles could include issues with the children, but also could be a conflict with the partner, or it could be a problem with the car, or it could be issues with that you get a bill for speed driving, for example. Things that occur on a daily basis in everyday life, at home, in your family. Another variable that is central in this study is rumination. And rumination is that you continue to think about the problem. So you have repetitive and unintentional preservative thoughts in the absence of the external cues. So you think about the problem while you are at work, for example. So something happens in the family domain, and you continue to think about it. So even though the triggering event has passed, the event-related information is still active, and it bothers you, it fills your mind. Yeah? So this is the model that we tested in this particular study. Family hassles happening in the evening before the day that we are analyzing. So that's on the top. Influence your feelings, your negative feelings throughout the day, and your ruminative thoughts about the family hassles. So they are here. They represent the personal resources that you lose. And this is supposed to interfere with you using your resources in the workplace. So we have job resources in the morning, influencing flourishing in the afternoon. Flourishing is a positive state of happiness and having the idea that you have good impact on clients, on the people you work with, on your work. So the positive relationship between job resources and flourishing is supposed to be moderated by family hassles, and the reason for this is that you feel negative and you ruminate about it. Yeah? It's a little bit complex model, but it's a very nice, in my view, a very nice way of testing interference. We are not asking people, was there an interference? No. We asked them what happened at home. We asked them what happened during the day and what happened at work, and we look at interference. This is, the contrast is not so super as I hoped for, but here you see how job resources have an impact on afternoon flourishing. We see that the more, on the days that people have more job resources, they are flourishing more. That's the red line. Can you see it in the back? Next time I will make it orange. But this is only true when the family hassles are low. On the, if you had the night before a lot of issues at home, then you're less able to mobilize and use your job resources, apparently. And one of the reasons for this is that you ruminate about the hassles. So we see here again a positive effect of resources on flourishing, but only under the condition that rumination is low. When people ruminate about the family hassles, the white line, then there is no effect of resources on flourishing. It's almost a negative effect, but that's not significant. So we wanted to look at this phenomenon also in another context, and we had actually the opportunity to study military, Chinese military, a big group of people that were away from home for 20 days, or for a month and 20 working days. And when we started the study, we said, well, these are young boys particularly. They are about 20, 22 years old. How can family life interfere? And then we came with the idea of homesickness. Homesickness. So they were away from home, put in a camp somewhere in China, far away from their family. And we thought that homesickness may represent the family hassle or the trigger from the home demand, let's say. And homesickness is defined as a reaction to leaving one's home, characterized by ruminative thoughts about home, including missing your family and friends. And I have some examples that I found from people who work abroad. These are, of course, Chinese people who are away from home. I have actually two studies, so I have military, and I have also people who come from the farmland, go to the cities to work hard, where they make our smartphones, for example. And they are also away the whole year almost, except for 1 or 2 weeks in February, they are away from the family. And they have this experience of homesickness. But let's put it in an international perspective. So here is an excerpt that I found on the internet, and this person says, it's an American lady, she says, it's a loneliness more like feeling left out or unaccounted for, not being a part of an organic community, family events, friends get-togethers at home, missing my grandpa's 90th birthday party, along with countless other milestones, and not being with relatives for Christmas, being away when I would like to help someone going through a crisis, having my own crisis and needing support from someone who already knows me very well. So if you're alone in another country, if you have been in such a situation, you can relate to this experience. Yeah? Or if you are in another culture and you are far away from home, let's say that you are in Spain and you are not used to Spain, then you can have this experience. So this is actually a student living with a Spanish family, and she said, for those unfamiliar with Spanish cuisine, there is a lot of meat. From beef to blood sausage to chorizo and shellfish, almost every meal was filled with rich and oftentimes unidentifiable foods. One night I asked what we were eating, and since I didn't know the Spanish word they used, conejo, My entire family started acting like rabbits at the dinner table in an effort to help me understand. I was shocked. So these are the experiences that you may have when you're homesick. And this may perhaps interfere with how you perform at work. We do eat conejo in the Netherlands, but not very often. I can relate a little bit. So the idea of this model is then that homesickness that you experience on a daily basis, let's start with the first study among the military. We follow them 20 days. At the end of each day, they fill in a questionnaire and they inform us about their job resources throughout the day. Then we ask their trainer to tell us about their daily performance in terms of their safety behavior, whether they adhere to the safety culture, whether they were driving very safely. Actually, I have to tell that they learned to drive a truck. So in 1 month, they were in this camp to learn to drive a truck. So safety behavior was a nice operationalization. And another one was in-role performance, as reported by the supervisor, by the trainer. Homesickness is expected to interfere, and key resources are expected to help you deal with your homesickness. That is the work-home resource model that I'm testing here. And you have to realize it's the second time that I go from the family domain to the home domain. It could also be the other way around, but this has been studied less often. Okay, one of the key resources we studied was emotional stability. That's one of the big 5 personality traits, and that's the tendency to be confident, secure, and steady also when confronted with threats. Yeah? Like James Bond. Here's the two-way interaction. And I have to highlight the red line. It's here, it goes up. I wish I had another color. But you see here again that resources experienced on a daily basis predict performance, safety behavior, as rated by the trainer. But this is only so if homesickness is low, the red line. The white line indicates that people experience on a daily basis. They are thinking about home, and this interferes with them using their resources to perform well. So this is a very nice two-way interaction effect. Here's the effect for safety behavior. Let me go here. Here's the three-way interaction for safety behavior. It's a bit complicated, but what you see is that the positive impact of job resources on safety behavior, it's again the wait a second. It's again the red line, well, what is it? Not so super red line, Bordeaux-like. This is positive only under condition of low homesickness and high emotional stability. So let me try to explain more. If you have high homesickness, that's the two lighter lines, then the effect is flat. There's no effect, more or less flat. Yeah, that's the white dotted line here. And it's the more beige line going a little bit down. Then the very red line is low homesickness, but also low emotional stability. So you are not emotionally stable enough, you don't have enough key resources to use your daily job resources and to turn them into good performance. And this was true for safety performance and for task performance as rated by the trainer. Nice finding. I liked it very much. Our PhD student won a prize with it. And it came out in the Journal of Organizational Behavior. And we hope that people will start to use it. One other key resource that we investigated was openness, another trait, characteristic. And openness is about openness to new experiences, like being imaginative, sensitive to beauty, being behaviorally flexible, and being intellectually curious. That personality factor didn't work in the first study among the military people, but it did work among the migrants who went to the big cities. And we found the following effect. We see here on safety behavior, and this is actually safety behavior in a two-wave study where the difference between the time between the predictors and the outcome is 3 months. And we see again the same pattern. This is a bit complicated again, But we are lucky that we have only 2 generations interacting, actually. Imagine that we would have 4 generations interaction. Then I would fly around the whole thing. Anyway, we see here again a positive effect, but only if homesickness is low and the key resource of openness is high. Yeah, in all other conditions it's flat. So people with key resources who are not interrupted, their mind is not filled with ideas about family life, they profit most from the resources at work so that they perform well. Okay. Yeah, this is what I just said. This is Shanghai, where my student will be heading. Nice, interesting place. Very busy too. We stay in China, and the next study was among, again, Chinese working parents. We followed them, again, 5 working days. And this time we used 2 questionnaires per day to separate variables from each other. And this time we wanted to look at a positive effect, so at work-family enrichment. And we used one variable called family capitalization. And family capitalization is actually something like you experience something positive. For example, you go to a nice movie together and then afterwards you share this with others at home and you talk about it. And then as a consequence you relive the experience. So I went 2 weekends ago, I went with my son and my wife. We went to Black Panther, nice movie, according to my son, but it was indeed very nice. And we had sushi in Amsterdam, and we had a very nice experience, and our daughter was not there, but when we came home, we talked about this movie, and we told her how nice it was, and she will go another time. So family capitalization is sharing the positive experience that you have at home with other people, and the consequence is that you relive it. So you go through the scenes again, you have the nice experience of the sushi eating again, and that makes you feel good. The model that we use here is from home to work and then a positive process. And the process is as follows. If you look at the white beige boxes, we have positive family events on, let's say, day 1, leading to family capitalization in the evening. So you talk about what happened at home, and that influences the next day, day 2, or day 2 influencing 3, 3 influencing 4, 4 influencing 5. So we have from day to day, we have fluctuations in positive events and family capitalization, and that is supposed to have implications for your behavior in the workplace. And we choose here the crafting of social job resources because it's every variable that you see here is social. So people are primed to be social and have this approach motivation to look for help in the workplace, crafting, and also to reciprocate and show organizational citizenship behavior, OCB, and help other people. So you ask for help and you give help. That is what we test. This is also what we find as a main effect. And we have as a key resource optimism. And it moderates each of the effects that you see here. Here you can see that on the days that positive events happened in family life, people were more likely to talk about it and capitalize on them. And this was particularly true for the optimistic individuals with the key resources. Family talking about positive events was related to job crafting in the workplace, but particularly, or actually only, for high optimistic people. Job crafting, so proactively looking for social resources, asking for feedback, asking for support, and so forth, was related to OCB, helping others, but particularly for optimistic people. So you see that key resources help people to capitalize on the things that happen. This is a summary of everything we found. We found also main effect of trait optimism on the aggregated score of crafting. But generally we see that the effect is stronger of the whole process, of the indirect effect of family events on OCB for those who are high in optimism. Very nice finding, I think. It was rejected after a revision at the top journal, but we will collect new data to add and to make the case stronger and hope to publish it somewhere else. Then there's another study that I worked on for quite some time myself. I've been thinking about it for, I don't know, 3 years or so. It happened, it was around the time that my mother died. This is a major life event, of course. And I was thinking, I'm always trying to model. So Alfredo was saying he's a number guy, I'm a model guy. So I was trying to model my own experience and to see whether this could be true for all people. So what we did is we sampled a group of Dutch employees who went through a major life event less than 1 year ago. And it could be the death of a family member, it could be a divorce, it could be sickness or lots of negative things. Let me go here. So one of the things we wanted to study is the phenomenon that Sabine Sonnentag proposed, that is psychological detachment, but then detachment from the major life event. So we thought it would be very useful if you wouldn't think too much about what happened, because that would interfere the whole time, that would fill your head during your workday. And psychological detachment is simply defined as stop to think about the major event, thus stop spending your energy and time and attention on thinking about it. Yeah? This is the model that we tested. We have a major life event for everybody. So we actually, in this model, we have severity of the life event, predicting rumination, thinking about the event all the time. Actually, we have here a weekly follow-up for 5 weeks, or I think for 3 weeks. So there was indeed a positive correlation between the severity of the major life event and the frequency of weekly rumination about the event. There was a negative correlation with psychological detachment from the event. And these two were supposed to interfere with the use of resources in the work domain. So self-efficacy we tested here. Work engagement and performance. So we have an indirect effect saying that resources help you to be engaged and perform well. We had also social support. It didn't work at all. We also present this in the paper, but we give it a minor role because this is what we wanted to tell. But it's important to know that that didn't work. And we say, well, rumination can kill the positive effect here. Rumination can undermine the positive effect here. And psychological detachment from the major life event will help you to use your resources for work. And this will be particularly the case if your work is very central to your identity, if it's very important for you, because you can put your mind on something else that is important, and you can stop thinking about your relatives or the divorce or whatever happened in your private life. So we find indeed that self-efficacy, this is on a weekly basis, so in the weeks that our participants felt more self-efficacious, they were more engaged and indirectly they performed better. But this was only true if they were low on rumination. So the white line is high rumination, the effect disappears. So that's a two-way interaction. We see that detachment helps. So detachment from the major life event helps you to use self-efficacy, to be enthusiastic about your work, to feel vigorous, and to be absorbed in your work. So the red line shows that the effect disappears almost under conditions of low detachment from the major life event. And here's the three-way interaction with work role centrality. So we see the dotted line, the white line, that high detachment from the major life event helps you to use your self-efficacy to be engaged at work and perform well. But this is particularly true if work is also very important for you. Yeah? Again, complicated. I have a lot of three-way interactions. You don't see that a lot, but I like it, and I like it particularly if it comes back again and again. And it doesn't show up always, but so regularly that I start to believe in it. So I have some conclusions, and then we have time for questions. We have some evidence for the work-home resources model. I think this is just the beginning. We have to look also at the effect from working life to private life, but we started looking at home life to work life particularly. We have a little bit more grip on the causes, the mechanisms, and the consequences. The model can integrate negative and positive spillover in one overall model. And we identified a role for key resources, like your personality, like your optimism, and so forth. We didn't look very much at the role of macro resources, but this is more complicated. You may need to set up an international study, cross-national and cross-cultural study, where you could perhaps look at this, where, for example, certain Scandinavian and countries versus America, where in Scandinavia the social system is very well arranged for work-family balance, whereas in America it's less optimal, I would say. And if you have the macro resources, that would help you, that's the point that we make with the model, in dealing with the contextual demands and mobilizing the contextual resources, so that needs to be tested in future research. We have some evidence for the key resources, and again, this model looks simple, but it goes both ways, from one domain to the other. So again, for the future, we need more tests, and I hope that some of you will do that. We are now having new projects, collecting new data, where we look at how work can influence your sport performance. So we look, for example, whether if you craft your work and make a lot of meaning at your workplace, whether that leads to running faster and running more stable among marathon runners. That's one of the studies we do. Macro resources I mentioned, we need to study them. Of course, we can also think about organizational level resources to incorporate it in the model. And I want to mention the paradigm that we use, the do paradigm, where we have this interference with the process in the workplace. So this interaction I find very elegant, better than the measures where you ask people for the effect. And with that, I thank you. Gracias.
Okay, time for questions now. I have some questions for you, Arnold. Thank you for your presentation. And although you were fighting with your pointer, but it's a challenging situation. Which is the cultural element impacting such a high percentage of women working part-time in the Netherlands? Assuming that this is something voluntary.
Say it again, say it again.
Which is the cultural element? Why is happening in the Netherlands so often that women wants to work, assuming that this is something voluntary, in a part-time situation?
Okay. Well, I think that a lot of the female workers, a lot of the women choose for part-time work. There are also many men who choose for part-time work, by the way, to get a better balance between their work and family lives. Because if you have, and this is particularly true for when you have young children. So, for example, we have 2 children of 13 and 16. When they come home at 2 or 3 o'clock from school, my wife is also a professor, works in another city. I work in another city than where we live. Then nobody's home to make a tea for them, or to tell them that they have to eat something, or to eat some fruit, or to ask them, how was your day? So a lot of people try to organize their life so that they can be more often there for their family. So, for example, my wife stays 2 days a week home to work from home. We are in the new gig economy. Well, we are in the university, but we work in a new way. And I'm also 2 days a week at home. So 4 days we are covered. And 1 day, okay, we have a piano teacher who teaches them piano. Yeah, so I think one reason is that we have the luxurious position and enough resources to do this. If you have 2 people earning, making a living, then working 4 or even 3 days a week for one person, and the other maybe 4 or 5 days, is more than enough to pay your mortgage and so forth.
I think this question is about the first study that you show about homesickness. Which are the sides of the effects that you're talking about? The sides of the effects.
That's a nice critical question. I'm never so super interested in sizes of effects. I like in showing effects again and again. So what is the effect of smoking on lung cancer? I think the effect is tremendous, but if you look at it at an individual basis, you will see that the effect is super small, so you need a lot of people to find the effect. So I'm saying that some effects may be very small. You need 100,000 people to find it, but the significance and of the effect is there in this case. I believe the same in our case. So for example, let's go to the study that we talked about. 2- and 3-way interactions among the Chinese people working away from home. Well, oftentimes reviewers tell me your interaction, your 2-way interaction, and particularly 3-way interaction, it explains very little of the variance. Yeah, of course I know that. I know that. Of course it is true. But what do we see here for those in the front? Maybe also in the back. We see, if you put the lines together, if the groups would be equally large, the two groups, or the two measurement points, the series of measurement points, we see a positive main effect. That eats up a lot of the variance in the regression equation. But what drives the effect? That is what you see here. There are subgroups in your main effect that explain not a lot of extra of the variance, but they are already in the main effect, but this makes it clear how the effect comes about. That's why I like interactions, no matter how little extra variance they explain. So for me, this is not crucial. For me, it's crucial that you replicate across studies, across situations, and you build an overall model that makes sense. That is for me important. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Sometimes the small effects are telling big histories, no?
Yeah.
So what can a human resource department do to prevent the negative effect of homesickness during, for example, an expatriation process?
Yeah, I thought about it because I made the presentation and I forgot to put practical implications, what we often do in organizational psychology conferences. I didn't do that here because I was also more interested in the theoretical process. We want to know what's happening, but there are some practical implications. So for example, I gave the example of the rabbit. I gave the example of people being away from home. So oftentimes expats are, and their families, they come to other countries and there's a lot of money involved. So why do they take people from other countries? Why do they invest a lot of resources? Because these people, they bring in a lot of skills that are not in the country, apparently. So I advise all the companies who do that to send these families also to their home country, maybe 2-3 times a year, and pay for that. That would be helpful in alleviating the impact of homesickness. And if you don't do it, you will have effects of it. We've seen it. It will deteriorate performance. It will deteriorate flourishing, engagement, and so forth. So since this helps to drive the business, it's better to invest a little bit in the families of expats so that the experience of the whole family is much better.
Another one, what are the practical implications in terms of intervention of your results?
Equally difficult. Well, the practical implications are like when you think about the job demands resources model, some of you know this model. If you have the specific, and here's true, they are also here, of course, we have this history. If you know the specific demands in the context and the specific resources in the context that are used or not optimally used, then you know how to intervene. So, for example, if the direction of the effect is from work to the family, then you can say, as a company, I have the responsibility to take care of the well-being of my employees because it even affects their families and whether they do the dinner cooking at home. So I want to make sure that I don't put too many contextual demands on them, or I want to make sure that I give them sufficient contextual resources, specific resources, so that they feel okay and go home okay, so that they have a good time. The other way around is more difficult. So you cannot, as a company, do much to prevent the death of a family member. But you can maybe say, okay, we give you some time off, or we can help you maybe, particularly for the people who find work super important, you can help them to get involved very much into work so that they forget a little bit about the misery that they have to deal with. So I think these are some of the possible implications, but it's a little bit complicated.
We have more time for questions in the audience. If you want to ask something to Arnold, we have like 5 minutes, so go ahead and yeah, over there. The microphone is coming, is to give some mystery to the...
I'm Shazia Almas and I'm from Pakistan doing doctorate here in the faculty. I can very much relate to the homesickness thing you were talking about, and I have many examples that Conejo which can relate to that. And what I feel for me, like the most important for expats or the students who come here is the commitment. Like we do feel emotionally unstable, but inward we have the commitment that we are here for some purpose or some degree, so we have to complete our work, our investigation, and we have the motivation that as soon as we will complete, we can go back. So there is commitment, and there is also self-efficacy. We do have a higher level of self-efficacy, that we take the risks, and we do feel that we can complete it, and we can go for even my Spanish is very pathetic, so one day I wanted to ask somebody, can you take a photo for me? And I said, I wanted to say, ¿puedes? I said, ¿quieres? Do you want a photo for me? So I have many examples, and on my part, commitment and motivation and self-efficacy is very important.
But I know from experience that it can also be an enriching experience.
Yeah, of course.
Well, we have Greek radio in the house all the time, and it's very funny, very interesting.
Yes, and we explore ourselves, that we have very strong nerves. Like it's very different. My culture is very different from Spanish culture and language and everything.
Yeah, nice.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It was just an addition to your finding. Thank you.
Gracias.
More questions? In the meantime, I have to make a remark about the siesta. I have to tell you, Arnold, that siesta is a myth.
It's a myth.
It's a myth. During a regular working week, siesta is impossible. So maybe during summer, like in Greece.
But we have a lunch break of 1.5 hours, right? In the Netherlands, this would be 1 hour.
Yeah, but it's for discussion, not for siesta. So you are not allowed to sleep.
I'm happy with it. No worries.
More question? Over there. Sabine and on the back.
Yeah, thank you very much, Arnold, for your very, very interesting presentation. I am really impressed by the three-way interaction effects, and I think they might be able to bring more light in what is really happening, because often we do not find anything strong, and maybe they just tell us life is much more complex than these simple bivariate associations. Do you have any thoughts or first parts of a model or a theory about which factors to pick that go into the three-way interactions? So what is important? So it seems to be not being distracted by homesickness, rumination, low detachment, and having something positive in addition. But how would your model or theory look like?
If you look for a more general model, I would say that approach avoidance would be very interesting as a super key resource. So we see in personality research, for example, that extroversion is very helpful. Why is it helpful? Because it helps you to be social and to use your social and contextual resources. So this is a multi-level effect of your trait on what happens on a daily basis. And you have avoidance and that has to do with security. So it's also the promotion prevention approach. It's BIS-BAS, behavioral inhibition versus activation. So it's in a lot of models, being outgoing and social versus being selective and being focused more as an introvert on what you are doing. So this is very important. More generally, in terms of personality factors that work most often, I think is extroversion and emotional stability. They are most crucial also for daily performance. So that's very helpful. The question is that really stable? That's again another question. So there are more and more researchers also in the personality domain who say, well, even extroversion can fluctuate from moment to moment. And I'm now trying to be extrovert, but I'm also happy when I'm back home on Wednesday to sit behind my computer, and I will be completely introvert the whole day, and I will be working on an article. And the alteration and being able to switch between personality aspects, that's for me most important. Yeah. I'm not sure whether I answered everything, but it's a complicated analysis, but it's my experience. Yeah.
Thank you for your speech, Maria Eugenia Ciofalo from Puebla, Mexico, UPAEP. I want to ask you, please, if the use of key resources and personal resources are more related to self-efficacy and or self-esteem, or are there cultural basis related?
Can you phrase the question a little bit different? So
Yes.
what do you mean with the cultural aspect?
Yes, it's more individual. The way I use my key resources and my personal resources is related to my self-esteem or self-efficacy, or it is related to my culture.
Yeah, I can see what you mean. It relates to the idea of being more individualistic versus collectivistic. It could be that certain cultures, maybe including Mexico, that the self-efficacy or the efficacy is more collective, that you want to function particularly good as a system, as a family, or as a group. Well, that would complicate the model maybe a little bit because you incorporate things already. But more generally, my response would be that of course, self-efficacy is an American invention. Believe in yourself. Yes, I can. It's very American. But still, I think that a lot of people all over the world, in all cultures, if they think they can have control over their environment, it will help anybody. So the mean scores can be different in the different cultures, but if you have a bit more, on the days you have a bit more, you will perform better. So it helps everybody, and maybe in some cultures, it clusters more around groups and around families. So that's an interesting perspective, and we can look at it. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, I think it's time for the break. We have a break of half an hour, and we will continue in half an hour. Thank you very much.
I have the other. Oh, you had another one. Another one.
Yeah, probably easier. Sorry. Yeah, if you want, yes. As well, if you want to tweet, I encourage you to use also this to locate all the information when we finish, and also those students who are interested in the Créditos Paco, funny name, then you have to go to Socrative. I think that you're used to do this. You have to go to Socrative, and the room is called Future Work, and the questionnaire is Future Work 1. I think each session is going to be monitorized, and in that way they will give you the hours for the Créditos, so that's all. Now we are going to introduce our next speaker, if I can find the information. And it's Rolf van Dijk, who is a professor from, sorry for my German, sorry. I apologize in advance, from Goethe University of Frankfurt in Germany, and is the dean of the department. He's also a director of the Center for Leadership and Behavior in Organization. Prior to this activity, he has been working in UK in the Aston Business School, and he has published several papers and books. And also he has been the editor or associate editor of several journals, like for instance the Europe Journal and the Journal of Personal Psychology or Leadership Quarterly. He has been also visiting or working in universities of Shanghai and Beijing, Tuscaloosa in US, Rhodes in Greece, and in Kathmandu in Nepal, which is also quite interesting. Today he's going to talk us about leadership, specifically about the social identity approach to effective leadership. So let's give a warm welcome to Professor van Dijk.
Estimados colegas, muchas gracias por la invitación. I'm really happy to be here, and it always feels like being around friends and family. And that's what I'm talking about, friends and family, social connections, social integration, and how leaders can contribute to feel us more as a group, a team, and what benefits that may have. When we think about leadership, we often think about one person standing in front of others, one person taking the lead and telling others what to do. And I think this poem by Bertolt Brecht exemplifies nicely that we may think about leadership a little bit differently. So I try to pronunciate the Spanish correctly. Obviously the original poem is in German. ¿Quién construyó Tebas? La de las 7 puertas. En los libros se mencionan los nombres de los reyes. ¿Acaso los reyes acarrearon las piedras? Y Babilonia, tantas veces destruida, ¿quién la construyó otras tantas? Roma la Magna está llena de arcos de triunfo. ¿Quién los construyó? ¿A quiénes vencieron los Césares? Bizancio, tan loada, ¿acaso solo tenía palacios para sus habitantes? El joven Alejandro conquistó la India, él solo. César venció a los galos, ¿no lo acompañaba siquiera un cochinero? Tantos informes, tantas preguntas. What is leadership? Leadership is the process whereby one or more members of a group influence other group members in a way that motivates them to contribute to the achievement of group goals. So leadership is not just about leaders, it's about followers. And it's not about me, it's about the us. It's a group process. And essentially it's not about power over others, it's about power through others, through groups of people. I will give you a very quick overview of social identity theory, then we'll tell you about the benefits of social identification for almost everything. Then I will tell you about two leadership models that have been developed in parallel, the identity transfer model and the CMOL. I will show you one study where we have combined these two approaches, and then I will focus on a more recent project that I'm also being involved in, the identity leadership inventory and model. So social identity incorporates principles from social identity and self-categorization theory and basically argues that it's a qualitative difference. It's a big difference, an essential differentiation, whether my behavior is based on the I, my personal identity as Rolf van Dijk with my individual strengths and weaknesses and personalities, or whether my behavior is based on our social identity, the us or the we. I as an academic, I as a psychologist talking in this room with other psychologists and other academics who share the same group memberships. And this has important implications for social and in particular also organizational behavior. When a social identity is salient or important in a given context, like our identity as academics, then we see us a little bit more interchangeable because we share the same perspectives. We mutually influence each other's behavior. We coordinate our behavior with reference to the norms that emerge in this context and that positively distinguish our group from other groups. And it makes us starting to work collaboratively to advance the interests of the group as a whole. This is the basics of social identity, and it has been applied to a number of fields and areas. And typically we talk about identity, but what we measure in most empirical studies is people's individual identification, the degree of which the organization's identity helps them define themselves as an individual. And we do that with questions or with items like these ones. This is from the classic scale by Mail and Ashfors, probably the most frequently used scale. When someone praises Universitate Complutense, it feels like a personal compliment. When someone criticizes my university, it feels like a personal insult. I'm very interested in hearing what others think and say about my organization. Or when I talk about our university, I say us rather than them or they. So we can measure it this way, and then we can differentiate people high or low on identification, and we can focus on this, or we can put a focus on the organization as a whole, or teams or departments within the organization. And what we typically find is positive effects on all sorts of variables that we can also measure in survey studies, for example. The most recent meta-analysis has been published by Lee, Parker and Co. 2015 in the Psychological Bulletin, with over 100 studies showing that there are strong association between identification on the one hand and work-related attitudes and behaviors such as organizational commitment, job satisfaction, job involvement, turnover intentions, but also performance measured by hard data, objective data, for example, in-role behavior. You see that this is the weakest correlation of 0.22, but it's still a reliable and substantial and meaningful correlation. This correlation may be so small, however, because our in-role performance is often not under our voluntary control. So if you are a car dealer, car sales may go up and down depending on the national society's economic standing. If we focus on citizenship behavior, which is much more under our voluntary control, there's a number of studies, including our own meta-analyses, that have shown that the relation between identification and citizenship behaviors, extra engagement, is almost twice as strong as the one to in-role behavior. So this is what we know from meta-analyses, and then there's a range of individual studies, single studies, or sometimes 2 or 3 studies that also show that identification relates to people's creativity, it relates to people's customer orientation, etc. pp. So identification is good. Identification is good for the organization. It helps people being more motivated and doing a better job, both in role and extra role. Now you could ask the question, but don't people then sometimes exert themselves? Don't they focus on their own health, own well-being as much as they could? The research clearly shows that people who identify with teams and organizations report also greater well-being. So theoretically, Alex Haslam, I and several other people have argued that employees who identify with their teams see the other team members more as in-group members and therefore also support each other more. They also, in the team that share a strong identity, they develop higher collective self-efficacy, which helps them reduce problems and address problems more proactively. And this leads to less stress and greater well-being. We have recently published a meta-analysis with Nick Steffens as first author and PSPI, in which we show in 62 studies that there's a reliable relationship, positive relationship between identification with team and or organizations and all sorts of health-related parameters, also objectively measured health parameters like physiological measures, cortisol, etc. That's the Spanish national football team, and from my outsider's perspective, the Spanish team was never very successful up until the late 1990s, early 2000s. Why? Because there was not a shared identity between the great players playing for Barca or playing for Real. And in the 2000s, we all know that this has changed and that an identity has been formed across these players. So what I want to show you, and what is not so obvious here on this slide, is our identity transfer model. Basically what we say is leaders' identification translates to followers' identification with teams and organization, and that leads to more positive outcomes. I think you cannot see the references here. We have done studies in the healthcare sector, in the pharmaceutical industry, and in the travel agency sector. We have shown that this model holds across industries, across branches. In one paper, first author by Jan Wieseke, published in the Journal of Marketing, we also show that it holds across 3 different layers of hierarchy. So in this study, we had 35 regional directors, 300 managers, and 1,000 travel agencies employees, and we show that identification trickles down from the higher to the lower levels of hierarchy. And in that study, we also show that it is related to financial performance of the travel agencies. These are cross-sectional studies mostly. We could control for things like when we did it in schools, we controlled for school type, size of the school, school's reputation. When we did it in the travel agency area, we controlled for the location of the travel agency. Like, is it a prime location in a business center, or is it somewhere on the outskirts of a city? We control for size, etc., etc. In one study with Sebastian Schuh, that should be here, we had done this experimentally, and in 2 studies we show that when we manipulate leaders' identification, this causally influences followers' identification. I'm not denying that the other way around would also be possible, but the trickle-down or transfer model that we propose has been confirmed in numerous studies. We also show, in this case, in a study that we've conducted in China, that the link between leader identification and follower identification is mediated by transformational leadership. Why is that? Because leaders who identify more strongly with their groups treat their followers as in-group members and therefore can inspire them more and are more aware of their needs and demands. And also leaders who define themselves more via their organization and membership, they also are more active in creating a positive vision and a positive outlook into the future for the organizations they lead. And finally, in a final set of studies, this paper in the healthcare sector, we show that it even trickles down to customers. So customers identify more with those organizations in which followers identify more because, for example, in this study we show that followers should show more customer orientation when they identify more strongly, and this is the mediator again between leader identification and eventually the outcome of customer identification. So I think we have done some 10 or so studies, and we are pretty confident that there is such a thing as leader identity transfer. So if leaders identify more, it's good. At the same time as we worked on our model, Dan van Knippenberg, Mike Hawk, Alex Haslam and others have also worked on a different model combining social identity and leadership. They call it the social identity model of leadership effectiveness in organizations, the CMOL. And what they are arguing is that leadership does not operate in a vacuum. That means leaders and followers share the same group membership, and leaders can gain in effectiveness. For example, they can gain in their followers' satisfaction and support when they are attuned to the identity of the group they lead. What does that mean? Groups have prototypes. We know what a specific group should look like and is all about. And the more the leaders represent what this is, the group's identity, or at the heart of the group's identity, the more they receive support from their followers, particularly from those followers who are strongly identified. I only show you one study that we have conducted with Johannes Ulrich and Olli Christ, published in JP almost 10 years ago. And I think it was a nice combination of a scenario-based study that helps us answering causality questions, and a cross-sectional study of real workers, real employees that adds ecological validity. So in the scenario study, we have brought together students who we knew that they were supporting a specific party, in that case, the Green Party in Germany. And we were giving them scenarios of a leader that was described as either being prototypical for the Green Party or not prototypical for the Green Party. We then have said in the scenario that this leader has recently made an important decision, either giving voice to the party members by asking them for their opinion before making the decision, or not giving voice and making this decision without consulting the people they led. And then we asked them for overall support of the leader and procedural fairness. In the second study, we surveyed about 400 employees, a very heterogeneous sample, and we asked them, for example, with item, to what extent does your direct supervisor represent what your team members have in common, or to what extent is your direct supervisor a good example of what your team is about? And then we also asked these employees about voice in decision making, and we also asked them about procedural fairness and overall support for the leader. I'm only showing you the effects on leader support or leader endorsement. The effect for procedural fairness looked almost identical. So what we see is across both studies is that prototypical leaders, the solid lines, are more endorsed as a main effect. And for prototypical leaders, particularly in the employee sample, it didn't matter whether they gave voice or they didn't give voice. For the scenario study, there was a small positive effect for voice versus no voice, but it mattered much less. Then for the low prototypical leader, you can see for the low prototypical leader, it makes a big difference whether they give voice or not. Similar effects have now been found in over a dozen studies. The most recent meta-analysis by Barreto and Hock has been published at the end of last year with 17 studies on leader prototypicality. And the general finding is that prototypical leaders are trusted more. They can afford to go it alone. This has benefits and risks. The benefit may be that it obviously saves time when you don't discuss things a lot with your followers. The risk is that you may find blind obedience. Now, we think that sometimes it's difficult for leaders to be seen as prototypical. What is with female leaders in the fire service or in the police or in the army? What about male leaders in primary school education or in nursery education or in the healthcare sector in general? It's more difficult for these people to be seen as prototypical, but they can just as easily as they're more prototypical or more typical colleagues show that they are identified with the organization. And in one paper or in one study, we try to combine prototypicality and identification. And again, this is a combination of a scenario study and a survey study. In the scenario study, we asked 120 students, and we gave them a little audio recording to listen at from a student who was running as candidate for leader for the student union. And we had 4 versions of the tape. In one version, the leader was describing him or herself as prototypical but not identified, then not prototypical but identified, and vice versa. So it was a 2-by-2 experiment. In the survey study, again, we had about 400 employees, and we asked them about prototypicality of their direct supervisors and their perceptions of the extent or degree to which their direct supervisor was identified with the team they led. And as dependent variables, we measured the extent to which the followers identified with their leaders or would identify with the student if he would be elected, and perceived leader charisma. The effects were identical for both dependent variables, so I'm only showing you one example for leader charisma, and this is a scenario study. In the employee study, the interaction was also significant and revealing the same pattern. So what we show is that when a leader is highly prototypical, it does not matter so much whether he or she is low or highly identified, but when a leader is not so prototypical, it makes a big difference whether this leader is seen as identified with the team they lead. So if you are not prototypical, you can do something about it. You can show that you are identified with the organization or team you lead. So that seems easy. Either identification trickles down automatically, or leaders just have to be prototypical, or if they are not prototypical, then they have to demonstrate their degree of identification, and then followers would be identified and everything works well. Unfortunately, no. In all our surveys, in all our studies, we show that not all employees identify strongly. There's always variation. There are always some employees who identify not very much with their teams or organization. Also, what we find is that employees identify often more strongly with smaller units, such as teams or departments, and not so much with the organization as a whole. And this can lead to conflicts and can lead to problems. In the paper with Riquetta, we have done a meta-analysis across 38 studies. We have found that lower level identifications are often more strong than higher level identifications. And in the paper with Andreas Richter, published in AMJ in 2006, we show that when hospital employees only identify with their teams, but not with the hospital at large, then there are more conflicts with members of other teams and less productive inter-team collaboration. Third, sometimes employees do identify, but at the same time they may have some feelings of ambiguity or ambivalence, and they are not so sure about their organizational membership. And we have shown in one human relations paper, also with a 2-study approach, that when people are ambivalent about their organizational membership, then identification does not translate into the positive outcome so much, as I have shown you at the beginning, as it does when people are not ambivalent and identified. What we show in the study with Nick Steffens in 2017 that was published, when identities are shared within groups, then better health outcomes relate. So what we've done in this meta-analysis was we had 60 studies, in which we find the relation, the link between identification and health, as I told you. But subsamples of these studies we knew were from one particular organization. So we used the standard deviation in the respective organization as a moderator for the meta-analytic correlation between the IV and the DV. And as expected, we found that when standard deviation was low, meaning more sharedness of the identity, then the identification positive health link was particularly strong. And finally, mergers and acquisitions. There are numerous studies, some of them we have conducted, that show that mergers or acquisitions or generally change initiatives like downsizing can pose a threat to people's identities. And at these times, it's particularly necessary to actively manage identities and identifications in organizations. So in the second half of my talk, I would like to introduce a model and then a scale that was comprised to measure this model. This was built by Alex Haslam, Stephen Riker, and Michael Plato, and the book is entitled The New Psychology of Leadership, Identity, Influence, and Power, published in 2011, and they argue that the sense of we and us and creating a shared social identity is behind all effective leadership. And this comprises three different dimensions. We already talked about leadership prototypicality, so the more the leader is seen as one of us and typical for who we are and how we are, the better it is. But creating this sense of identity also comprises three more dimensions: identity impresarialship, entrepreneurship, and advancement. And I will show you each of these dimensions by showing you the items of a scale, the identity leadership inventories that Haslam and others have comprised to measure these aspects. So first, identity prototypicality, being one of us. And this paper, I hope, will be in press in an hour or tomorrow. We have just submitted the third revision to JUPE, and it was already a conditional acceptance in the last round. What we have done in this paper is we use the identity leadership inventory in 20 countries. Spain was not one of us, but Chile was. So we have 300 people from Chile, and we translated it into Spanish. And across these 20 countries, we could show in confirmatory factor analyses that there's metric invariance. So the identity leadership inventory shows the same psychometric properties across all cultural contexts. We can also show that identity leadership explains burnout, job satisfaction, identification with team and leader, extra role behavior, and creativity above and beyond LMX, transformational leadership, and authentic leadership. We also show some cultural modifications or moderations. We also show interactions between these dimensions, but I'm not going into the details of this today. So, identity prototypicality. The leader embodies what the group stands for. The leader is representative of members of the group. Think about your own leaders. Think about your department head or your university rector or your small team leader, or think about your own leadership. What do you think your employees would answer to these statements? Would they think that, yes, my direct supervisor exemplifies what it means to be a group member, or rather not? Second dimension, identity advancement, doing it for others. Think about your direct supervisor, or think about you as a leader yourself and what your direct reports would answer to these statements. Do they feel that you promote the interests of the other group members, or do you mainly promote your own individual interests? Do others see you as acting as a champion for the group? Standing up for the group at tough times, when in departments, for example, there are fights about resources, rooms, money, lecturer positions, etc. Does the leader stand up in these situations? When this leader acts, he or she has the group's interests at heart. So this is identity advancement. A third dimension, identity entrepreneurship, or crafting a sense of us. And I deliberately put people like Bush or Trump here because I'm not saying effective leadership is always good leadership. Identity is not per se the morally better thing. It just says that the leader can pursue his or her own and the group goals more, the more they act as advancers, entrepreneurs, and impresarios of identity. And when they follow the wrong cause, then they are more effective in following this wrong cause. So identity per se is no good or bad. It just helps us understand when leaders can exert influence and achieve through others power in the names of a good or a bad cause. Identity entrepreneurship. This leader makes people feel as if they are part of the same group. This leader shapes the group members' perceptions of the group's values and ideas. We have used this subscale of identity entrepreneurship in one survey study with 650 US employees. And what we found was this is all self-report, so group performance is not an objective measure. But what we found is that the more leaders are seen as entrepreneurs of the team's identity, the more group members were willing to engage and the less they were suffering from burnout, and both processes mediated the relation between identity entrepreneurship and group performance. So if leaders create this sense of us, then it leads to more performance because people are more engaged towards the cause. And the final dimension, identity impresarialship, or making us matter. This leader devises activities that bring the group together. This leader arranges events that help the group function effectively. This leader creates structures that are useful for group members. It's very small things. I try in my little group, for example, to do a retreat once a year where we go somewhere else, have 2 days of sports and drinking and playing and chatting, but also discussing what do we want to achieve? Do we need to change in response to more students at our university? What research project would we like to pursue as a team in the next 1 or 2 years, etc. We also have structures, for example, like a regular weekly team meeting in which we make a small round where everyone, including student assistants and secretaries, briefly state what they are going to work on in the coming 1 or 2 weeks, so that everyone feels in the picture. Obviously, we also have a Christmas party once a year, but I know that this is not common in every group, so it's sometimes small things that you can do to help people feel what it means to be a member of this team or group. Recently we published a paper 2017 in Leadership Quarterly in which we have, this is not the study, in which we have 2 studies. In the first study we analyzed 2 million journal articles of 48 heads of state, prime ministers or president, who died while they were in office. 48 people altogether worldwide in the 20th century. And we analyzed about 1 million articles before and 1 million articles after they died. And what we found was the leaders, after the leaders' deaths, their charisma ratings went up. So charisma was mentioned more often in the articles after their passing. Then we added a second scenario study describing a leader in the academic arena, and in the second version we just mentioned that this leader had passed away recently. And what we found was also stronger charisma ratings of this fictitious leader. And in this study we followed up on it, and I don't know whether you know Helmut Schmidt or Helmut Kohl, 2 former German chancellors. So I tried to replicate the first study when Helmut Schmidt was still alive, and it didn't work because most people didn't believe us that Helmut Schmidt had died in the condition where we described him as dead. But I just kept the data in the Helmut Schmidt alive condition, and then he died. Not And I gave out questionnaires again. And I had the idea maybe it would also be a good idea to survey people about Helmut Kohl at the same time. And then I patiently waited for 2 or 3 years, and then Helmut Kohl died. I wished him a long and happy life, but that's how it goes. So this is Helmut Schmidt and Helmut Kohl. The condition is alive or dead, and the outcome is charisma. And again, we found that people rated both chancellors as higher on charisma after they died. But in this study, we also included a short form of the identity leadership inventory and a measure of identity fusion, which had been developed by other people. And what we found was mediation. That means we can explain the rise in charisma, at least partly, through the leaders being seen as more one of us after their death. Okay. Oh, and now this is also difficult to read. Conclusion. Identification is good for the organization, the group, and the individual. It's good for everything. Leaders' identification spills over. Prototypical leaders are more successful. But identity management is more than prototypicality. And I would like to end with one example. Ursula von der Leyen, she was Germany's Federal Secretary of Family, Work and Social Affairs for a long time, for 8 years. And she was always portrayed as a woman, as an attractive woman who did things that women are typically doing. She had 7 children, and she cared for her elderly father, who was also a politician in Germany. So that fitted very well. She was prototypical for the office she held. But then Ursula von der Leyen became Germany's first female federal defense secretary in 2013. And many people in the public and the media were critical of her and said that she had never demonstrated any experience with the army before, etc. And as a woman, she would not be fit for that office anyway. What did Ursula von der Leyen do? I don't know whether Sabine will remember, but many people clearly will not have followed the German media. The German army is for many years suffering recruitment problems. Many Germans do not want to join the German army. The army is also facing other problems, health problems, early retirement issues, etc. So what Ursula von der Leyen did in the first full year as Secretary of Defense, she changed the image of the army, she changed the identity of the army, and she brought issues on the agenda like we want the German military, the German army be more family friendly. We want to have childcare for our soldiers' children. We want to reduce soldiers being sent around Germany every 2 years and never have a firm place where they can start a family, etc. So she tried to change the image of the German army to a work family-friendly organization. And you can imagine that she put herself more center stage by doing this. So she was the epitome of a good identity leader by making herself more prototypical, by crafting what it means to be in the German army. After she did this, she could portray herself as a strong woman, and she started to address the real issues like corruption in the weapon systems and faulty weapon systems, etc. I have some colleagues in the German army who told me that this was very cleverly done and had given her the credit to pursue the real issues. Muchas gracias.
Thank you for your interesting presentation. We have some questions from the audience. I see that Arnold is quite active, so I will try to summarize the questions of Arnold. Can prototypical and identified leaders can foster creativity, or do they lead to maintain a status quo?
So the one study I was referring to, we published in JOB a few years ago, and in that that study we show that identification is positively related to creativity and also externally rated creative performance. And this study was done in a research and development context. So generally speaking, identification always leads to the identified group members following the norms and the rules more. And in a research and development team, the norm is to be creative. So identification leads to creativity. But what we also found is that this effect was enhanced by the leader being seen as prototypical. So typically contexts in which the leader was also having an engineering background and being seen as an innovative person. And by transformational leaders who used their own creativity to inspire others. So we found both two-way interactions and a three-way interaction effect, that identification was most closely related to creativity when the leaders were prototypical and inspiring. But I can also imagine other scenarios in which the opposite is true, as you imply by your question. So a prototypical leader who he or she himself or herself do not want change for whatever reasons, the more the followers will do what these leaders say. And that may be a downside. This may be particularly in the context in which you, Alfredo, introduce us to tomorrow, where change is deeply needed. These leaders may block necessary stimulation and innovation, but I don't know of any study.
Would be nice study. Yeah. Is charisma a myth?
No, I don't think so. I mean, all the work of John Antonakis, probably the students don't know him so well. John Antonakis is at the University of Lausanne. He did some studies on charisma in the last years. And there's an interesting TED talk by him. So he has done a number of studies, and I think together these studies show that at least charisma has some elements that are observable and amenable. For example, speaking in metaphors or learning to speak with your full body and not only your mouth makes you appear more convincing, more inspiring, etc. And this then has positive effects. And I do think that this is true. However, our studies show that charisma, at least to some degree, is a social attribution. How come that people after their death are more charismatic? They cannot speak in any metaphors anymore. So particularly, and many of you have heard about the Romans of Leadership papers and approach. And in football, it's very apparent that the manager is seen as a great, charismatic, inspiring person as long as the team wins. And when they lose 2 times in a row, then these same people are fired, although their behavior has not changed a tiny bit. So, yes, I think there's a kernel of truth in charisma, and probably more research is needed to identify what it is, but also it's a social attribution, and we should be careful to disentangling this.
I have to say that I never seen manipulation like yours, trying to, waiting for someone to die, so it's quite interesting. What do the prototypically and identity effects say about the possible effectiveness of female leaders in male-dominated teams?
Yeah, I think with Ursula von der Leyen, I've tried to show you one example. I think for female leaders in male-dominated work contexts, it could be a chance not to be more prototypical, which is not so easy, but using the other 3 elements of identity leadership. Because why should a female leader, say in the army, not create structures that bring the team together? Why should a female leader in the fire service not stand up for the group when they fight about resources with other teams or organization? And I think this can overcome the lower prototypical that women have in these contexts because of their sex. As I said in the ILI global project, we also looked at interactions between the 4 dimensions. And the broad picture is that when prototypicality is high, everything is good anyway, irrespective of the other 3 dimensions. But when prototypicality is low, leaders can set off this effect by being high in 1, 2, or all 3 of the other dimensions. So prototypicality can be overcome, and I think this is a good message.
So that means that women have to work harder?
Probably not to work harder, but to communicate more clearly what it means to be in this group and
Working hard.
yeah. No, not necessarily. I mean, you also know the meta-analysis by Abril and colleagues that shows that women are a little bit better on the transformational leadership dimensions, communicating a vision and individual consideration. So I think this puts women in a slight advantage because this is all about communicating a vision and treating individuals as in-group members.
Because men don't have to do these things at all.
Yeah. But when was the meta-analysis published? 2001 or 5 or so? So it's already some time ago, and I think the old model, and what Abril and colleagues also find, is that men are a little higher on the transactional leadership stuff, and this transactional leadership stuff also worked well for 100 years, but it will continue to work less well. And I think the modern workplace requires people who do not lead with carrot and stick. They require people who can communicate and attend to the demands. Yeah.
What's your opinion about the impact of female and male about inter-team competitiveness?
Okay, I think, in my opinion, in some executive committees, you find not a good diversity about female and male. So the impact of gender diversity on cohesion, let's say, or identity cohesion. What's your opinion on that, please?
Honestly, I tried to identify gender issues in my data, and I hardly find any. Probably because the reality is so much more complex than just a basic women help or prevent, for example, cohesion, have lower coercion. If you think of the first statement on the first slide, leadership is not power over, but it's power through. You might imagine that women are better to utilize power through others and are not as much as Donald Trump and his fellow colleagues interested in exerting power over others. But we do find relatively little in our own data. So for example, in one paper published in Journal of Business Ethics a couple of years ago, 2-3 years ago, we show in 4 or 5 studies, including large samples of employees, including longitudinal studies, including short studies with students, that women are a little bit less motivated to assume leadership roles. So we use power scales, we use motivation to lead scales, and we continuously find that women are a little lower on these motivation to lead, which served as a mediator between gender and leadership role occupancy. And after that paper, I tried in several studies to frame motivation to lead or power differently, because we thought that for women it still has a negative tone to have power. So we deliberately created this issue or this frame of promotive control, promotive power, helping others achieving their goals by using power and leadership responsibility. But we didn't find any gender differences. So from my data, I cannot give you a clear answer.
More question, and probably related to that one, is how is changing this profile according to different cultures?
In general, the meta-analysis by Lee, Park and Co. and also our initial data on the ILI leadership project shows that culture moderates the effect in general in a way that cultures with higher collectivism show stronger effects of identification on all sorts of outcomes. So if the cultural context makes social integration, family, groups more salient, then individuals' level of identification can lead to even stronger outcomes. But again, the reality may be a little bit more complex. There are 2 or 3 papers, for example, that show when people have multiple identities, so when they think of themselves as being member in many groups, they are more resilient. They can persist more. They can suffer from stress more. Except one context, and this is a paper published in Frontiers by Australian and Japanese colleagues. In Japan, it does not work. And when I was in Japan and talked to one of the colleagues who was co-author on the paper, she explained to me, in the Japanese culture, the group that you are a member of is so important to you that you do not want to ask your team members or group members for help because you want to avoid putting a burden on them. So the more strongly you identify, the more likely you are looking for help elsewhere. And when you need help in your own group, it feels like an embarrassment. So I think this is a very interesting study, and we need to replicate this. We also need to follow it up. But the basic and general answer is, in almost all the other data that I know, collectivistic cultures render group identities more salient, and therefore individual identification with these groups has a stronger effect.
Okay, I see some of the questions that has been sent by people from the audience, so I give the word to them. I think Professor Navarro is having a question about your model as well. So, with the microphone, there.
Thank you for your talk. Maybe you know the team model leadership proposed by Morgers and some colleagues. I don't know. You know? No. Well, there is a model based in the idea that the teams need to manage different kinds of processes, some related with action processes and other related with plan processes. And they are a model of team, a model of leader that can be checked in comparison with the model that you are using, because both are based in the idea of the team in groups in your case. No? My question was about, did you know some empirical evidences about what of the both is better? No?
I don't know this model, unfortunately, but I think social identity can be used as kind of a moderator that would accentuate or attenuate all the effects that other general input process output models of teamwork would suggest. I'm really also inspired by the work that my former colleague Michael West is doing in the British National Health Service, and what they have found in some studies 10 years ago was that the higher the number or the higher the amount of teamwork in hospitals, the lower are the rates of patient mortality. So when there's more than 60% of teamwork in hospitals, then patient mortality goes down. And he was interested in this finding, and in subsequent studies, they have surveyed 300,000 employees of the NHS year by year, and they had hard data on patient mortality of the hospitals that these people were working in. And he asked people in these subsequent studies, are you a member of a formal team, yes or no? And then he added 3 more questions. Do you have shared objectives? Do you know what your team wants to accomplish? Do you regularly meet to reflect on these team objectives? And the third question was, do you mutually feel accountable for accomplishing these objectives or not? And whenever people answered 1, 2, or all 3 questions with yes, when people answered all 3 questions with yes, West and colleagues put them in the group real team. When they answered 1, 2, or all 3 questions with no, then they were put in the category of being a pseudo-team. And what West and I found was that being in a pseudo-team is worse than being not in a team at all. And only being in a real team contributes to lower patient mortality, lower bullying and mobbing, lower staff stress, etc. So putting people in a team alone does not help. I think it needs a shared identity, and leaders are the ones responsible for creating this shared identity, because only then people know why are we here and what is my individual's contribution to the overall goal. And then all the issues that are discussed in these IPO models exert strong effects. But when people just don't know why am I here, then these factors cannot exert an influence as much.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question before we make the break for lunch.
Lunch?
Lunch, yeah.
Lunch?
Here, Gerardo, here, Ana. Sorry.
Thank you. Which is the relationship between the impact of the team or group members on the social identity of the leader? Because leadership is a mutual process.
Mm-hmm. As I said in our research on the transfer model, we have done a lot of cross-sectional studies, and we have done some experiments looking at the influence from leaders on followers. But I do not deny that the opposite path would also be possible, particularly in conditions in which you have young leaders coming newly into a team. They will also certainly adopt what is already there. And when they come into a team that has a strong identity and everyone identifies strongly, then they will probably also adopt this. And vice versa, it would be very difficult for them to create some identity when all the team members are low on identification and do not feel members of a team. But I think despite the theoretical and probably if you would study it, the empirical relation also from followers onto the leaders, I think it's still the leader's responsibility to actively manage identities. Yeah.
Okay, I think we have to stop here and see you in an hour and a half. So enjoy the lunch and refresh your mind for being so active with this session. Thank you.